All right. Well, welcome everyone. We will now be starting our selecting and maintaining RC Drive Team session. Before we begin, I would just like to remind everyone that this session is being recorded, and as such, chats and Q&As will be monitored during the session as well. So be sure to utilize your gracious professionalism. Anyways, now that our presenters are ready, we'll go ahead and get started. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Michelle and Randall.
Thank you. So hi, thanks to everyone for joining us here today. We are FRC Team 1683, the Techno Titans, and we will be informing you about how to select and maintain an FRC Drive team. So, like our host mentioned, my name is Michelle Hio, and I am a senior this year. This is my third year coaching and my fourth year on the team. This year, I am primarily the coach, vice president, and engineering head.
And yeah, as you said before, my name is Randall Sinkler, and I'm a sophomore, and this will be my second year on the team, and my second year as driver, and I'm also on the fabrication sub-team.
So as mentioned before, we are the Techno Titans, and we are based out of Northview High School in Johns Creek, Georgia. The club started as a team of one mentor and a few students in 2005, and now we are a team of 70 people and 8 mentors. Our last championship was at Houston during FRC 2019, and so a lot of the topics we're talking about revolves around the system that helped shape our FRC 2019 and FRC 2020 drive team. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what is a drive team? An FRC drive team consists of 5 elements: the coach, 2 drivers, the human player, and the technician. These are the people who will be representing your team on the field and have a variety of roles when it's time to play a match. Above, you'll see our 2020 FRC drive team, and to the right, you'll see our 2019 main drive team. So our drive team structure allows for each individual person of the drive team to be aware of their duties before, during, and after the match. So first, we have the coach, who we designate as the primary point of contact between your drive team and between your alliance partners. On our team, the coach is usually the most proficient in strategy, and this is because the coach is the position we believe analyzes the entire game, not just the team's robots. Next up, we have the driver, who is the main person driving the robot, and the co-driver who mainly manipulates the mechanisms of the robot for that year. The human player is the one interacting with the field and usually has some form of contact with the scoring elements, and the technician is usually our most experienced member of engineering who can assess the status of the robot during the match. Today, we will be primarily focusing on the coach, driver, and the co-driver. So you may be wondering, why do I need an entire selection process to choose a drive team? Like, can't I just put in a few people who I think are skilled? To answer it simply, your drive team is a reflection of the team. Strong, communicative, dependable, and teamwork prioritizing drive teams show other teams how much your team values building good relationships with other people. Being a good drive team with members that are skilled and have good attitudes can help other teams enjoy the competition setting a little more, knowing that they have partners who want to succeed and have fun as much as they do. The robot you worked hard on for the entire build season can't reach its full potential unless you have a drive team who is dedicated to make that robot shine to the best of its ability. And so your members need to reflect the values of the team. First isn't just about your own little FRC team bubble, it's about the entire community. And drive team just happens to be one of those links your team has to others, especially at competition. Our presentation is going to highlight just how you can achieve these things through a selection process and a maintaining cycle.
So first, we're going to cover how to select an FRC drive team. On our team, we try to choose drivers early and keep them for as long as possible. Someone may be good at driving when you first choose them, but with lots of practice, they'll be even better. The same is true for your co-drivers. Co-drivers should also be chosen early, preferably as a freshman or sophomore, so that they can improve over the years, though this is not as important since games change every year, therefore the mechanisms on your robot will change every year. Your coach also should be compatible with your drivers. On the field, they spend a lot of time communicating with each other, and the field's a very stressful environment, and that stress can bring out the worst in some of us, so a coach and driver that get along is optimal if you don't want an argument to break out mid-game. Good compatibility also helps the games go smoother too. If the coach can trust the driver to make good decisions on their own, the coach can spend their time doing more productive things like communicating with alliance partners to improve teamwork. So when selecting our drive team, we look for someone who is skilled in their position, although that isn't the only quality we look for. We also want someone who is mature and respectful. When you're at a competition, your drive team represents your entire team, and you wouldn't want your team to look immature and disrespectful to others. Alliance captains also wouldn't want to choose a disrespectful alliance member. We also want members that are dedicated and willing to work hard. Being a drive team member requires a lot of practice and therefore lots of dedication. You need a member that is willing to put in that time. And you also need members that are assertive. You need a driver that will be confident and won't be indecisive, and a coach that can confidently lead the drive team. Cooperation and communication are also very important skills in members. You're a drive team, and that means you have to cooperate and work as a team. Those qualities are also important because you have to communicate with your alliance partners.
So our evaluation process started in 2018 during the grit season, and the process that we take to carefully assess each candidate has proven rather effective with the results we've seen, and it allows us to choose the most capable drive team members who exhibit the qualities stated previously. We start off the evaluation process with an application because we believe that all members deserve a chance if they desire the position. We ask the generic details of their name, grade level, which is a very important factor, their sub-team, past experiences, and then a few personal questions like, what do you believe qualifies you for this position? Then, after a week or so, we go straight into the evaluation process. Our second stage of evaluation consists of 4 trials, and we're going to describe the merits of having each trial in the upcoming slides. But to put it simply, we start off with an obstacle course, a rules test, then a bit of practice with the previous field elements, then a final skills test. Each of these trials is usually followed by an elimination in some form, which helps us narrow down the group quickly and efficiently. We tried to avoid cutting down too much during the first round, simply because not many people have actually driven an FRC robot with the specific controls before. But as we move on to trials 2 and 3, we begin narrowing down the group through basic assessments of, does this person exhibit those drive team qualities, and what is their skill level at, as well as how much will they be able to improve? That last question is really important because even if they're skilled, they need to be open to growth. The final stage of our evaluation is analyzing and announcing our results. And before we announce the official drive team members, we usually consider the perspectives of not just one person, but multiple. Taking opinions of multiple people decreases the likelihood of having a bias in the evaluation from just one experience with one evaluator. And so what we have done is that if there's a pre-existing drive team member or members, we take their opinions and also have mentor opinions because they often have valuable insight into things that we students often miss. In the evaluations for the FRC 2019 and 2020 drive team, I was one of the main evaluators. I also had a senior member of the team, as well as a mentor, be the other evaluators alongside me.
So last year, I went through the driver selection process, so I'll break it down for you and explain each trial. So like we said before, the first trial is the obstacle course. So we set up this obstacle course with many blind spots, hard turns, and other difficult things to simulate the stress of a real FRC competition and have candidates navigate through it using the previous year's robot. We also use the course to evaluate how well candidates react to sudden directions. And since this is also the first time the candidates will drive the robot, it also helps them get used to the controls. And we use this as an opportunity to evaluate the attitudes of these candidates. So, and then for the second trial, which is the rules test, many candidates fall short. We were given 3 days to study the rules of the game, and the rules test is a very specific test that asks for the penalties for certain violations or the points scored from certain actions. This test can help evaluate the dedication to candidates, and those without a passing score were dropped from the selection process. The rules test also helps the candidates prepare for competition if they make it there, especially if they're new to FRC and have never seen the games played in person. And from personal experience, I can say that being familiarized with the game really helps for the rest of the selection process and eventually the competitions. And so the third trial was the first proper skills test we did, and this was a very intense trial. Candidates are told random directions and are scored based on accuracy, speed, and how many directions were successfully followed. The results from this trial and the previous 2 are what decide the top 5 for the final trial. And one recommendation we have is to have the older members get tested first, because they have seen the game played before, and it'd be unfair if rookies had to go first. We also simulate the loudness of an FRC competition by encouraging cheering from other members and playing loud music. This makes the trial a very stressful and a very random one. So for the final trial, it was another skills test similar to trial 3, but everyone is given the same directions, and candidates are not allowed to watch each other's trials. Evaluators view how much candidates have improved from the beginning and take data like their best time, the least amount of errors, and the most calm reactions to stress. From that data and our attitudes throughout the whole process, the evaluators make their decision.
In our FRC 2020 evaluation process for drivers, we had a total of 21 applications, which was a solid fourth of our team, and we had to get down to just one person. The process took 2 weeks from start to finish, and here were our general numbers for each trial. For trial 1, the obstacle course, we had 19 candidates, and by the end of it, 17 people were selected. As mentioned previously, we do not really view skill as a big factor, but this is mostly where you would see their attitudes and behavior. In trial 2, the rules test, the 17 people took it and 10 candidates successfully met the needed score. And so by then, we knew the general personalities, attitudes, behaviors, and dedication of each candidate. So we were at the stage where skill and growth potential mattered. In trial 3, the field element skill test, we narrowed it down to the top 5. And from the top 5, we conducted our final skills test to find our #1 ranked driver from the 21 candidates. So here's an analysis of one of the FRC 2019 driver tryouts. This is trial 1, the obstacle course, and the criteria we were looking for was how smoothly they could drive, how well they could respond under pressure, and how well they could adapt to their mistakes. So the obstacle course may seem relatively simple to those of you watching, but it was actually made to create blind spots for the drivers, and so many of them were likely to make mistakes, and seeing how they reacted was especially important. So here's the video. And so as we can see, the overall manipulation of the robot was really smooth. And though there was a hiccup with the grabber of the robot, the candidate was able to calmly proceed through the course. He actually scored the best time by a landslide, and his cool and calm attitude was definitely beneficial. He was actually our driver for the FRC 2019 season. And here is an example of an evaluation sheet that we used. We have categories for what we believe is important, and you'll notice a lot of the data is subjective, but that's perfectly fine. The goal of the selection process is to see how well they'll fit in with the rest of the drive team, and so judging attitude and behavior based on the interactions you have is perfectly fine. So now we're going to cover how to select your drive team coach, which is a bit of a different process than your drivers and co-drivers. Just to clarify, your coach can be a high school student or an adult, and that adult is typically a mentor of the team. The most important qualities of a coach, regardless of their age, should be that they're communicative, analytical, good at managing change, and an excellent strategizer. The main things you should keep in mind is that your coach is kind of like the glue between your drive team and your alliance partners. And so along with being all these fierce, dominant roles, they should also be a good team player, and finding this balance is really important. The driver should be compatible with the coach, and the coach should be compatible with the drivers. Something to keep in mind is that if you're a coach and you're coaching an entirely new drive team, chances are they are nothing like your old one. Each drive team has different personalities, playing styles, and so forth. And so the coach has to readily accept change and still manage to find the best way to gain points in these different situations. Unlike the drivers, finding a coach doesn't involve skill-based tests, and so we have a few different steps in terms of selecting the coach. The first thing you want to do is start with an application. It's important to realize that the bigger the pool, the better. The more options you have, the more you can see the differences between each candidate. Next, if you're a member of a drive team, or if you're just a main evaluator, you might want to conduct an interview. An interview sounds like an absolutely terrifying and is a high-stress, tense situation. And what you want to do is throw a few questions at them. This is to gauge not only how well they respond to these kinds of random and high-stress situations, but also how dedicated they are. The question should ask things related to coaching, like why do you want to be coached? What qualities exhibit your coach qualities? We then recommend having a rules test because even though the driver and co-driver need to know the rules, the coach has to have them memorized by heart. Okay. So continuing on, the coach is the one looking at the different zones, robots, and referees. And so they need to know what will cause penalties and what will not, so that their drivers feel confident that that while they're driving, they're not causing any penalties. We also recommend having a stage where an experienced strategy member goes through the process of making strategies with coach candidates. Since some of your players may be new to the process, it's important that you try to level out the playing field for each candidate. Reviewing strategies, how to change them, all that should be covered for each person. And though you shouldn't call it an actual test, you should give them small assignments to see what strategies each candidate comes up with, how many points they estimate that they can get in time, and so forth. The strategy aspect of coaches is huge on our team because the coach has usually been the pivotal person discussing strategy with our team and our alliance partners. Something I find really important as coach is to familiarize myself with the numerous strategies that each year's game has to offer. I come up with different scenarios, asking questions like, what would be best if I was in this scenario with this robot? And so we believe that analyzing previous games, which often have elements that may carry on to future games, is highly beneficial to any coaches or strategizers in training. Finally, we recommend a skills test. So this may not be possible if you're a new team or if you don't have a single drive team member yet. So this is an optional step and is completely up to you if you feel like it is necessary or not. Basically, this is where you can place the coach in a setting where the drivers are moving the robot and see how well they can manage verbal commands. What's even better is to have a backup set of drivers be either an alliance partner or an opposing alliance, where the situation becomes basically random and unprecedented. Whatever it may be, a skills test may come in handy.
So next, I'll briefly discuss how we select our human player and our technician, starting with the human player. Human players can be any grade level and experience isn't much of a factor. On our team, we use the human player position as a reward for those members that have the best attitudes. We also like to have a variety of sub-teams on our drive team, although sub-teams should not be a factor in selecting driver and co-driver. So when selecting a technician, you should select the most experienced engineering member on the team. Their duty is to assess the status of the robot during and after the match and report what needs to be fixed, changed, or improved. This position is very skill-based, and we usually choose our senior mechanical leads for this position because they usually have the most knowledge of the entire robot. Additionally, you may have a great primary drive team, but you should have a backup drive team if possible. Things happen and sometimes the main drive team isn't there to compete. So when you choose a backup team, choosing the next best candidates works just fine, but if the next best people don't work together well, then choosing others is always an option. So the backup drive team shouldn't be neglected either. Just because they're the backups doesn't mean they don't need to be trained. If you have a second robot or drivetrain, you can have both drive teams practice playing defense on each other or working together. All members should also have a good understanding of the rules of that year's game. Grits is also a good opportunity to decide which drive team should be the main one and which should be the backup. Practicing by yourselves is nothing like a real match, and you need to make sure your drive team can handle the pressure of a real match. Using grits as a real-time evaluation is a very effective way to give your drive teams more experience and figure out which can better handle pressure. So next, we'll cover how to maintain an FRC drive team. So I'm sure many of you guys have heard the phrase, practice makes perfect, and although it may be overused, it's still very true, especially when it comes to drive team practice. We like our drivers to practice on a variety of available drivetrains before the season starts. I was given the opportunity to train on our various tank drives before the season. And it's also nice to give the co-driver different mechanisms to practice with. Practicing together also helps us with our overall team chemistry. If possible, practicing against a defense robot is also extremely helpful. This could be your main drive team against your backup, or you can invite a neighboring team to practice with you if you have the space to do so. Going to a full-size practice field, like DE, is great. It's great for this because it's an actual full-size playing field you can practice on. And so using a data practice with another robot or just alone is great. So just a little more about DE. DE, now known as Development and Enrichment, is hosted by several teams in Georgia in numerous areas, and the teams work to build a full-sized practice field for teams to use. Whether it be for testing a mechanism or training your drivers, DE is definitely an amazing gift Georgia First and its teams have to offer. And of course, nothing beats training in an actual competition, so if there is a grits for that year, we strongly encourage teams to go. So most of the drills we use are usually done with the old robot, but are most effective when done with the robot for that season. One drill is the movement drill, where we practice optimizing turns and movements on the field and figure out the timing of moving mechanisms. Last year, Infinite Recharge required the CoDriver to start up the flywheel while I was driving towards the power port, and figuring out the timing beforehand at a practice field was very useful. Getting familiar with the playing field was also important because not only were we able to find our rough cycle times for strategy, we are also able to see what our field of vision would look like on the field. We have our own carpet that's about as big as a quarter of the field, so we built our own elements and practiced at different angles with different fields of view, and at a practice field we did the exact same thing. And of course, practicing our strategies came in handy for the real competition because we knew what we had to do even before we started the competition. So having footage of your drive team and robots are extremely helpful in maintaining a good drive team. The Blue Alliance and Georgia First YouTube videos serve as a great tool to see ways to improve the strategy, but we personally love having our media team on the field tracking the robot's motions, because it can show us how we can improve our movements to minimize the time we spend not scoring. And for some matches, I also wore a GoPro on my head, which was helpful in evaluating the actions of the members of our drive team, and also have some valuable resources for future drive team members to use when they practice to become drive team. So here's a sample of our GoPro footage. So yeah, so if you can see this footage, from this footage you can accurately see about your field of vision from certain alliance stations. You can look, and if you concentrate hard enough, you can actually see the other members of the drive team, and you can evaluate how well they work together during that match.
You can also see us celebrating in a few seconds.
Yeah.
One second. Okay, there we go. So now we've talked about selecting and maintaining an FRC drive team, but what should these selected members be doing at competition? This section will cover duties and responsibilities of individual drive team members at competition. So for each position, there is something that they should be focused on during the game. For the coaches, I believe that their primary role is to be the one looking over everything on the field. They shouldn't be focused on just their robot, because that's what the driver and co-driver are doing, but rather they should be seeing the status of their alliance, how much they've scored, where the other teams are at, and any possible obstructions for the team to achieve their goal. And of course, the time. It is crucial that the coaches have an awareness of the total surroundings because the drivers are focused on moving the robot, the co-driver is focused on manipulating the robot, the human player is focused on their job, and so the coach is the free position where you can stand and look around, assess the situation, and communicate with your alliance to find the best possible way to get more points. There's a lot to take in at first, but eventually, after a few matches, you'll get used to the rhythm.
So like it was said before, the driver should primarily focus on their robot since the coach is looking out for the other things on the field. So as the driver, I'm primarily in charge of focusing on the status of the robot. I also constantly track the robot's location because I of course have to see where I'm going, but I also have to monitor the surrounding area to see if there's a defense spot between me and my objective. I then need to decide whether to avoid contact or fight back depending on our strategy. And of course, communicating with the co-driver is important to figure out when to deploy mechanisms, and talking with the coach is important, especially if I need clarification for the strategy or to know whether or not the strategy has been changed. So the co-driver has very similar responsibilities in the sense that both the driver and co-driver are focused on the robot. The co-driver should be focused on what the robot is doing, like is it approaching a scoring zone, what mechanism is needed in that zone, etc. Locating scoring objects for the driver to go towards is also important as well as communicating with the rest of the drive team. Like all the drive team should be doing, the co-driver should also keep an eye on the time.
So here are some terms we'll be using for the remainder of the presentation. The first is the optimistic strategy, and this is the strategy that factors in the robot's abilities and its best performance given those abilities. This includes how many cycles each robot could do, like how many batches of scoring if you do. An example of a cycle is like FRC 2019, where a robot could do like 4 hatch panels and 3 cargo pods per match. The second term we have is optimistic score, which is the estimated number of points either an individual robot or a total alliance can score given the optimistic strategy. These will be explained in further detail in the upcoming slides. So for the rest of the presentation, we're going to cover the very basic elements of how strategy is done in our team. And we're going to start with strategy pre-match. All of the members of the drive team, and if you'd like, other members of the team should be involved at this stage because this is where you plan your optimistic strategy. So what we usually have is the best case scenario and the worst case scenario and what to do if this happens scenarios. And so you should always be starting off with the best case scenario. Make sure to know the status of your robot because often your best case scenario isn't the realistic one. After a bit of practice or a few matches, you'll have the chance to make your optimistic strategy a bit more realistic. Before each match, we go up to our partners and review what each party wants to do and can do during the match. We will all discuss our main strategies, then tweak those if needed depending on specific requests. For instance, in the case of FRC 2020, if a team wanted to focus on high goal and we wanted to as well, we would decide rotation patterns that allowed us to figure out timings of when each person would score. For the what to do if this happens scenarios, we try to think of likely possibilities of things happening during the match, such as whether or not there will be a defense spot. Preparing ahead of time helps us stay calm under pressures and unexpected events during the matches. So what we have to help us plan out our strategies is a strategy binder. We usually have multiple copies of a field layout or a whiteboard with the field layout design onto it that we can mark up. On the right, you'll notice a sample of a strategy sheet we use, and this is actually from Citrus Circuits, who has an excellent strategy system. You have to take into account the position you're starting from and the capabilities of each team to see where each team is scoring in order to prevent any miscommunication that may lead to delays. On the sheet, you'll see that I marked each team with a symbol, which helps the alliance partners see their positions, and you can also use colors as well. Last year, the end game was a climb, and you could gain more points if you managed to level yourself off. This usually required a lot of communication with the other teams, and based on your position on the field, you can either see the run closer to you or further from you. And so communication was very important. In this case, our field division didn't allow us to see the further part of the run, so we climbed onto the closer side instead. The binder serves as an organized place to put your strategies, which helps with simple organization and post-match review. As mentioned before, estimated point calculations are very important, and I often did them on the binder so that I could draw pathways that made sure the alliance partners didn't interfere with one another's objectives. So here I have the original document we used to calculate the alliance's points estimation. This was the quarterfinal match of the state competition in 2019. And basically, as the lower ranked alliance, we knew we had to figure out something we could do differently to outscore the other team. And that's where these numbers came into play. Factoring in each team's optimistic strategy, we calculated our optimistic score, which was 82. We also discussed things that could go wrong, including the potential fact that the other team could send a strong defense spot to our alliance. And this ended up being true. Since we anticipated it beforehand, we were prepared and sent our objectively lower scoring team to block their defense off. The calculated estimated points for the opposing alliance was 94, and they ended up scoring 91. Unfortunately, we lost the match, and although we could have tried changing up the strategy to play defense, none of our robots could play defense that could stop them significantly, so we played our optimistic strategy to the best of our abilities. At that point, the best thing we could do was just try to score as much as possible, but in the event that you can change something significantly, you should. Like if your optimistic score was only slightly lower than your opponent's and you had a potential defense spot, then you could try to change the strategy to accommodate their defense. These calculations did come in handy for our grid season in 2019. And we calculated the optimistic points and decided that for each match, we would send defense robots in order to decrease the opponent's chances of matching our score. Using this data, we managed to compete in the finals alongside with our alliance. During the match, there will definitely be unexpected events. In such events, you have to alter from your original strategy to optimize the number of points you can get despite the circumstances. A lot of the time, you'll face a bit of defense coming your way, and that's when planning with your partners comes in handy. figure out who's the highest scoring robot and who's not objectively. And that's how you know, do I engage in countering their defense to allow my teammates to score, or do I drive away because I am the highest scoring robot? This is often something that's kind of hard to do at first because often, depending on your drive team members' personalities, the only responses you'll have is to fight or take flight, and so countering this for the sake of winning is very important. So here we have qualification match 103 from the Turing field at Houston. The original optimistic strategy we went with in this match was that team 2733 would focus on the right rocket's hatch panels, which you'll see up to the top of your screen. And their optimistic strategy said that they could do 6 hatch panels for certain and then potentially do a few cargo pieces. Since we wanted that rocket ranking point, we said that we would fill from bottom up to fill up the rocket. Our other alliance partner team 6025 said they could fill up approximately 2/3 of the rocket, so we left them to do that. The cargo ship should be left to the cargo ship would be left open to any team and would become the primary strategy if we are running short on time and losing. So I'm going to play the video and stop at certain times to explain what's happening. Okay, so we see here that after the sandstorm period, at around T minus 113 seconds, the first level of the rocket was completed. And so we began doing our planned strategy, which was filling up the rocket from bottom top. And at this point in the game, all alliance members were doing their optimistic strategies. So at T minus 68 seconds, level 2 of the rocket was completed, and 2733 was placing hatches on the third level. By then, the score was 45 to 45, indicating that we needed to push the match in our favor by gaining more points. So we switched strategies to the two other teams focusing on their optimistic strategies, and us focusing on the cargo ship, where we knew we could score a lot faster. And so luckily this worked in our favor because 2733 was able to complete their optimistic strategy and we had scored into the cargo ship. And by then we were at 50 to 61, a comfortable distance, but things could always be tipped over by endgame. Let's keep watching. As you can see, we had our individual optimistic strategies, which was directed our focus to complete the rocket to get the most ranking points we could. In the middle of the match, however, there was no significant distance in the points from our alliance and the opposing alliance, primarily because they had a very similar strategy to ours, in which their focus was also their rocket. At the time, we didn't really know if our opponents could climb or not, and so we focused heavily on trying to outscore them with our rocket points and cargo ship points, and luckily, along with these points, we also had more climb points than they did, leaving us to win that match.
So after each match, it is important to review what happened. The driver and co-driver will often have opinions about the functionality of the robot, but it's important to talk about where you can improve in more areas than just the robot itself. The coach and the technician were up close to watch the entire match, so their input into what could have been done better is valuable, and the audience also has their own opinions, so listen to them too. After each match, the drive team will learn how to counter similar scenarios and formulate new plans to make your main strategy even better. Personally, we find the YouTube videos that Georgia First uploads extremely valuable to assess the driver and co-driver's movements, the strategy and how it could be improved, and the functionality of the robot. So after each day, we recommend that you go home and watch your matches.
Now we will show you a video of qualification 19 at the Turing field, and we want everyone to take a close look at some of the things that could be improved. And by the end of it, we'll explain the things that we had in mind in terms of what we could have improved. So again, this was FRC 2019, and this was at the Houston Championships in April. For those of you who have never seen this game, this was a game where you had balls known as cargo and then hatch panels that look like little discs with the hole in center. And then you had to put hatch panels and cargo pods into certain areas to gain more points. And by the end of the match, you had to climb up on that platform you see on the left and right. We are the Blue Alliance for this match, and we are the team with the cargo pod in its possession. So you may notice that the opposing team sent a defensive robot to our side. Normally, this would have been perfectly fine to deal with, but what we failed to do as an alliance was designate the lower scoring robot to block that defense off. It ended up being that they managed to block 2 robots on the left side of our alliance, and then they later managed to cage all 3 of our robots on the right side. And so that definitely wasn't good, and so our team knew that we had to work on ensuring that all members of the alliance were on the same page when it came to defense.
So, speaking of defense, defense is pretty much a play style where you're trying to obstruct the other team's ability to score points. Defense robots are commonly seen in a lot of FRC matches, and usually robots with powerful drivetrains that either specialize in defense or are the objectively lower scoring robot are sent to the opposing alliance's side to block off their opponents. If you're trying to find out who to send to defend, you have to keep in mind how the robot was built and how sturdy it is. For instance, a lot of teams like to use tank drives, where the wheels are always facing the same direction. These tend to be powerful defense bots because they can easily push over a Mechanum or Omni-wheel drivetrain. And some of the worst defense bots are the ones with the capability to slide around, which are the Mechanum and Omni-wheel drivetrains. To counter defense, you have to determine the objectively lower scoring alliance and the higher scoring alliance. And if you score less than the rest of your alliance partners by a significant amount, it may benefit your alliance for you to keep defense spots away from the higher scoring robots, which is who the opposing team will try to target. And if you're a higher scoring robot, you want to avoid engaging with defense robots to not waste precious time that could be better spent scoring points. So if you can see the video, what's going on here is there was a very small score gap between the two alliances, and our primary objective was done. So we didn't want to interfere with our alliance partners, so we decided to go block off 1311 on the opposing side. And if you can't see, we're on the blue alliance on this in this game on the right side. So we tried to block off 1311, and we made them drop their hatch panel. And then 832 came to try and fight us, which meant we were successfully distracting two higher scoring robots from their objectives. So the final thing we will be covering is alliances. For our veteran teams, you've probably seen many qualification alliances and many elimination alliances. And for our rookies, you'll be in many different alliances with many different teams, with many different playing styles, and so forth. In terms of what to do when you first meet your alliance, whether it be your qualification alliance or elimination alliance, you should always introduce yourself. Striking up a conversation is always helpful for them to feel at ease when talking to you, and this fosters a good relationship between your team and the other. Explain who's in what position, as well as who is the primary point of contact. Establishing your communicator is important, and keeping this person consistent helps people remember who to talk to in future matches. If a coach were to communicate to our human player, their words wouldn't necessarily reach us. The human player may not even be near us to explain what the coach was saying, so it is important that people know who they should talk to in order to get their point across. Like mentioned previously, talk about strategy, like what your optimistic strategy is and ask them what theirs is, and combine them to make one big strategy. And if you're in the position where you have enough time to do point calculations, you should do that too, because like mentioned before, these calculations can help you figure out what else you need to do to secure victory.
Now, if by the end of qualifications you're in the top 8, you have a high chance of becoming an alliance captain. If you're near the top 8, you should be on the lookout because often alliances will pick each other and then everybody else moves up. As an alliance captain, you become, well, the captain of the alliance, and so you're the one communicating with everyone on the alliance and the referees. We usually designate our coach to be the alliance captain because the driver, co-driver, and human player simply cannot leave their stations to talk to the other teams. And since your coach was selected as an assertive, strategic decision maker, they should have the qualities required to be a great alliance captain. As a captain, you should listen to your alliance. See what tips they have or the things they noticed about your opponents. Based on their feedback, generate a strategy together and review it with everyone. This is where point calculations come in real handy because you can see what you need to move it from quarterfinals to semifinals, then from semifinals to finals. During the match, you should be that loud person in the back yelling out scores and time to make sure everybody is on the same page. And you should also be coaching your own team. There will be situations in which something goes wrong, like a robot malfunction. Then you have to alert everybody else and come up with a new strategy or continue the old one and share that information. In short, the alliance captain, and I cannot emphasize this enough, has to be a great communicator, or else a series of miscommunications will cause the alliance's downfall. So that's all we have for our topic, and we hope this presentation provided some valuable insight as to how selection processes should be, what qualities you should look for in a drive team, and how to continue having great drive teams and what to do at competitions. We will now open up the floor for any questions. Let's see if I can make this any bigger. So, One question we have is that the process seems kind of time intensive, and if it is done outside of normal team hours, and how we balance these trials with other team activities. So, like I mentioned sometime in the presentation, our entire selection process takes up to 2 weeks per driver and co-driver. And so what happens is that we have our regular activities going on. So we usually have our sub-team leaders who are senior members dedicated to focusing on other members' activities. But we also have the 20 or something students who signed up in a separate area and working on the process together. And so our meetings in the first semester usually last for 2 hours a day. And so we can usually fit in our obstacle course and everything else in that 2-hour time period, because each trial ideally should only take less to a minute, and evaluating them takes around 30 seconds per trial. And so we can manage to get this all in 2 hours, and we usually have 3 to 4 meetings per week. And so that's how we can get it done within a solid week. And also we have a relatively large team, and so that makes it really easy for us to focus our work somewhere. So if half a group of students are going to do their trials on one day and then the other half on the another day, that's perfectly possible with our team size. I hope that answered your question. Let's see. Mentors believe that driving solely by a time trial and by who has gaming experience. So this is actually something that was on our team as well. A lot of our team members believe that, skills and gaming experience, who's the best gamer, that should be the driver. That was kind of the mindset back in 2018. But then how we changed it was that it's not really fair to exclude talent. Like you can focus on this one extremely good looking person, but you might be neglecting someone who can potentially be better. And so you have to remind your members that your drive team represents everyone. You can't just have the best gamer be on that field, because your best gamer might not be the best communicator, and that might lead to a lot of miscommunications within your team and the other teams. And yeah, these skills that we mentioned, that's not just related to skill, they're really important, because what I've noticed with our drivers from the past 2 years, they're fun, they're great to work with. It makes everything feel so much better. And we've developed their skills to their fullest potential after all this training. So even though a person can start off skilled, that doesn't necessarily mean they are the most skilled. So in terms of convincing your teammates, show them this presentation. Tell them what qualities matter in a competition. Randall, any comments?
No, I think what you're saying is, yeah, perfectly right. Especially about, the best gamer isn't always the best at driving the robot.
For example, Randall over here, he was actually a freshman when he tried out. He had never touched the controls before. And
Yeah.
so obviously this was very new to him. But after that selection process, we all realized, wow, he is the one who shined the most. Hope that answered your question as well. So, do we have any other questions regarding our presentation? I'm watching the little Q&A button up here. Should I assume that there are no other questions?
Well, if there's nothing else, then I think we're good to wrap up a little bit early.
Okay. So to everyone who's in this session, thank you for joining us here today. And if you want to contact us, here's our website, Instagram, Twitter, and email. Again, thank you so much, and we hope to see you guys in future competitions.